Good morning and welcome to Web3 Workers Pod, a blockchain solidarity collective production. The podcast that explores whether blockchain and other decentralized tech can put workers front and center in the real world and in the digital world. How can the international progressive movement learn from these potentially revolutionary technologies? All of our collective struggles are intertwined, and it's about time technology started working for us rather than us for it. All right, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon and good evening. We've got 3 different time zones meeting today, which is fantastic. This is the Web3 Workers Pod, which is all about how technology can assist the labor movement to try to make a better world for workers and for the people that live in the world, because in our current capitalist system, everyone must work. So worker and civilian are pretty much synonymous. My name is Mia. I'm in Seattle. I am a 3rd-generation longshoreman, union member, and I'm also a cultural theorist. So I describe myself as a humanities brain, but I have seen, it's undeniably true, that technology is what is allowing our population to move into a fundamentally new space, which should be an improvement if we follow the trend of evolution. We're here with Hazel, who is another Web3 Workers host, but has been unable to meet with us until now, which is very exciting, Hazel. And I know that, as change is upon us, lives become more chaotic, and it's always difficult to find time. But I'm really excited about today's conversation. We're going to cover AI, automation, what that means for the workers' movement. We're meeting with Matt from the UK, who has worked with AI and is chair of a tech union out there. So it's an excellent combination of some of the major issues that we're facing in today's world. So I want to give Hazel the chance to introduce herself, because she hasn't yet on this pod. She has a background in DAOs. And Hazel, what do you have to say?
Thank you for the lovely introduction, Mia. My name is Hazel. I work in political theory, and I work in a general area of governance research, and with a focus on community self-governance. And that includes like online communities, like Wikipedia, like the Wikimedia, like volunteer-run foundation. That includes like DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, and that also includes offline community self-governance, like intentional communities here and there. That's what I generally work in. I'm also really interested in unions and political art. That's my background.
How fascinating. God, we need your brain right now. Just because, especially as I dip my toes into the tech world, I found there's a particular type of brain that's attracted to that world. And there's a kind of a lack of human-based knowledge, like human-based education, emotional education, psychological education. And like I love to tell people, like, tech is a great tool, but that's all it is. It's a tool. You can create the most fantastic opportunity in an application for governance, but if people do not understand how to self-govern, which is a very psychological experience, it basically, has no purpose in existing. It's never going to fulfill its ambition if we do not bring it all together. The tech world, the humanities, and then labor is also a very fascinating third piece. And wonderful, we have Matt here today, who really represents a great combination of that. Matt, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, thanks, Mia. So my name's Matt. I'm chair of United Tech and Allied Workers here in the UK. We're a branch of the Communication Workers Union, and we try and represent tech workers across the UK, no matter what their job is, what role they find themselves in. As long as they're in the tech industry, we're trying to help them get organized. And I'm also work full time as a data scientist at a research company focusing on data science applications for solving socioeconomic issues, and particularly how we can use state-of-the-art AI to tackle some of that as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned that your branch began in 2020, somewhere around that area. Are you finding that the tech world is kind of beginning now to look at unions and what they can do, because I know in America or in Seattle, especially, we're such a tech hub spot. Usually they're contractually based, like they're independent contractors. Is that what it's like in the UK?
No, so we have a much higher sort of regular employment rate than I think elsewhere. It does depend on where you're working, though. I mean, companies like Google have a real reputation for employing independent contractors and trying to skirt employment rights, but generally it does tend to be less successful here. But what we definitely have found is, I'd say particularly over the last few months, but really over the last year, we've just seen a boom in the number of workers that are really looking to get organized. And I think some of that is a result of, just the snowball rolling in terms of raising awareness of the possibilities with unionism in the tech industry. But a lot of it as well is just the massive layoffs and sort of the downturn in the tech industry that's happened over the last year or so. There's really kind of a break in the trust that the tech industry managed to build over the last couple of decades as this kind of utopian form of capitalism. Like, if you follow our path, then everybody can get free meals like they do at Google, and can get these lovely workspaces. And that was never going to be true, but I think that spell has kind of broken over the last few years, unfortunately, and a lot of workers are starting to realize that the way to make that future for ourselves is to get organized.
Fascinating. Yeah. And especially, so I'm a West Seattleite, third generation West Seattleite. And so I have witnessed Seattle's population and economy change drastically, where you really can't afford a house unless you work in the tech industry. Like, it's just raised the basic income level so high that a lot of the blue collar workers, unless you have a really strong union, which is so fantastic. Like, I love unions so much. My father graduated high school, and my grandfather was one of the original UPS drivers back in like the 40s. So he got stock options and ended up becoming a millionaire because of the union. So it's really exciting. Like, I grew up kind of in a socialist country, or in my experience, because I had no medical debt, no education debt, and it's really because of the union. So it's exciting that tech workers are seeing the benefits of that.
Yeah, I really think so. And yeah, we've got to wait and see how the next few months go. But I mean, as we push towards our first recognition efforts, I think it really is a massive change in the way workers here think about themselves.
Absolutely. And Hazel, I really want to hear your experience working with the Labor DAO, because that's the biggest example I've seen of a labor-based organization using a different way of organizing that's not hierarchical. What's your experience been in the Labor DAO?
Sure. I think we can get into it like a little bit more later, but I think the goal of Labor DAO is, I think it's still in like a fairly early stage, because a lot of Web3 technology is in a fairly early stage. But the goal of Labor DAO is to use some of the like Web3 or blockchain technology to empower workers to unionize and empower like unions to function in that way. And that includes like ways that we can build up democracy, or like have systems of democracy from the beginning. Instead of like, because we observe that some unions tend to get a little more hierarchical over time, and democracy sort of breaks down on that level, and we want to build up good structures from the beginning to sort of make sure that workers are well represented. That's one of the goals. Another goal is probably with some of the privacy tech, because I think in America, it's not the easiest, it was not the safest thing for certain types of workers to unionize and speak up, like as a union. Like, for example, on Amazon, or like some other places, there are like notable
Starbucks
union
too.
busting.
You're talking
Yeah,
Seattle.
yeah, there's notable union busting efforts. So to organize, there's also like the safety layer that where privacy comes in, and some of the, I think, development in blockchain, like ZK or whatever, or like the pseudonymous nature of it, speaks to some organizers doing political work. So that's some of the things that Labor DAO is trying to do.
Interesting. Yeah. And I know we're going to talk about Web3 later, but Web3 workers is also just about technology too, and how that can support unionization and with the privacy aspect, I know that Signal and WhatsApp has really been used more and more. I mean, whenever I talk to tech people, they never want to use messages. It's always like, do you have Telegram? Do you have Signal? So it's becoming kind of the norm, which is really fascinating. And I wanted to ask Hazel and Labor DAO, is there a conversation about AI happening?
Right now, not really, but I think like I've definitely pick up like threads like with ChatGPT and whatever. Like, is AI like to what extent is AI and automation gonna take away jobs? I think that's just been the hot topic after ChatGPT um, and various other inventions got so popular. I think it's a little bit of the question on back of everybody's minds. But also like the context is labored out right now mostly work with not tech worker unionizing, but rather like Amazon and Starbucks worker unionizing. So there's also like a little bit of difference there.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, AI isn't really poised to make coffee. Or, there are some industries that are probably safe if they actually use a human body, if they need to use a human body. But Matt, can you tell us a little bit about your experience with AI?
Yeah, it's really interesting because, working in AI, you'd think that we would have had a bit of a heads up on what would have sort of happened with regards to the explosion over the last few months, particularly in generative AI, but we really didn't. And I think that's actually a really interesting fact and something you mentioned as well. The fact that AI is not ready to take over, you know, really a lot of the jobs we have, I think is really important because as much as we talk about the progress that's been made in AI, and it is huge, the real explosion we've seen is in one particular form, which is generative AI, which is a subset of the field as a whole. And it has massive potential, not only to disrupt entire industries, but also to introduce new threats in terms of disinformation and the kind of things we've seen already over the last couple of years, particularly in the US and the UK as well, around political elections and the enactment of democracy. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to wipe jobs off the face of the earth, because there are so many fields where true progress would mean the development of AI in other areas, not necessarily just generative. But I think it's going to have a massive effect on the way most of us work, and particularly, I think, people in tech, to be honest.
Right. Can you just define generative AI and explain why it's a subset?
Sure. So, I mean, the way I think of it is really as AI that is capable of creating based on its training prompts. So whether that's creating images, whether it's creating text, it trains on a template of human data. So that could be the internet, it could be books, it could be pictures of artwork, and then it reassembles those in different ways, the concepts it learns, into new content. And that is really incredible, but at the same way it's kind of restrictive because we think of ChatGPT as having thoughts because of the way it expresses itself, but really it's just designed to generate words, and it's designed to generate words in a way that makes sense in terms of human sentence structure and the data it's been trained on.
And I have never tried ChatGPT. Can you just explain for the layperson and me? So you're training, you go to the website and you give it data or a prompt, and then it extends upon that. Like, you have to feed it information, or does it already have access to the internet and kind of all the data?
Sure, yeah. So ChatGPT, as it stands at the moment, doesn't have access to the internet, but what it has been trained on is a massive subset of the internet that was collected over time. I think the current version of ChatGPT 3.5 is updated on data through to about March 2011, and then the later versions are a little bit more updated. But um, I mean, it's really just still using that massive data set. It's learning from that massive data set. And then when you, as a user, go in and use it, what you're getting is the outputs of what it's already been trained on. So what it does is it's essentially a very advanced form of what's the word? Predictive text. It knows what word should go next in a sentence. So if you ask it a question, then what's going to come most sensibly next is an answer. So it strings together an answer that seems to make sense based on the data it's got, but it doesn't have any internal concept of truthfulness, for example, or of what it's producing actually means. It's just generating content based on what it's already seen.
I think there are
Interesting. So
to there as well. But also, I would like to mention that like there's like Google just released this new AI called Palm, and I think it's also LLM, like large language model, and it allows like users to directly search on the internet with the most like updated data. And there are also other I think AI models like Perplexity AI that is like on the most like updated data, like the current status of the internet, even though ChatGPT isn't. Yeah, but both of these I mentioned work roughly similarly as ChatGPT because they're all large language models, which I will leave Matt to explain.
go ahead, Matt. You got the floor. What is an LLM?
Oh, it's a big task. But yeah, I mean, it's difficult to explain because the truth is that so many of these companies keep their models so secret that we have a general concept of what an LLM is based on the kind of open source models we've seen, the leaks from companies like Facebook. But really, what we're talking about is just an iterative process over what we had already. We're looking at the language models built on the deep learning techniques that have been well documented for a number of years, improved upon, and then trained on this massive corpus of data, way more data than most people or organizations even would have access to, and then using that to output results. And as Hazel said, sometimes the internet is introduced in really interesting ways as well.
Fascinating. So you mentioned earlier that there are really kind of specific fields that are facing the threat of automation from AI. And it does seem pretty ominous that there are these massive layoffs happening in Google and Amazon in the more tech fields. What are the fields that you see becoming a threat? Maybe they're not a threat right now, but maybe in the next 5 years, because I can just imagine, like I was talking to Hazel earlier, why would I pay a therapist when I can ask ChatGPT about cognitive behavioral therapy? Why would I pay a tutor? So what do you think? Who's
Yeah, I
under
mean,
threat?
yeah, the thing is, it's really difficult to say, I think, because so much of the way we interact with the world is just designed around, we don't even think about people being there. And so, would you may want to go and see a therapist that can answer your questions, but if you see a therapist that also can't truly understand you, is that the same thing? These are the kind of questions that I think a lot of people haven't yet answered. And the same is true when it comes to this, the industries that are really under threat. When we look at whether it's animation studios or a lot of art productions are really worried right now. What will it mean when most of that industry is AI produced? Will we learn to value the human element in art a lot more? Or will we, be happy with any old production that comes out? So it's really hard to say, because I think it's really hard to say how our values will change. But I mean, definitely anything that involves content creation, whether that's copywriting, whether it's creating artwork, whether it's tech. We've already seen the use of AI technologies that can write massive code bases. And it may not, it won't get rid of the tech industry as a whole, but in terms of reducing the number of workers needed, the potential is there.
Or it might
Yeah.
change the
Yeah.
ways
And
interact with the work, right? Like for example, like a lot of the generative AI have like a co-pilot thing, which helps coders like write code and then generates pretty good code. And I think like that's just like on one hand, it's like a powerful efficiency tool, but also like what does it mean for just like the number of software engineers out there? Like, does it mean they're gonna do the type of work that's, for example, because AI doesn't know truthfulness, like will it mean like human take on the more like debugging or like leading the AI or like asking the prompts type of role, or like will it mean just like will the efficiency reduce the number of jobs in total? I think remains to be a question.
oh, Hazel, oh, you broke up a little bit. Can you repeat what you just said? I don't know if it's a mic problem.
Yeah. I think I just said like I just want to highlight the like co-pilot function. That and also like picking up on what Matt just said, that AI is really powerful in writing code right now. And what does it mean for like the software engineering industry, right? Like, does it mean like human will be on more of the like
Yeah, and just to add to that as well. Oh, Sorry, just to add to that as well, I think it's really important to remember that these are the kind of conversations that were going on in the 90s and the 2000s as well around the internet. There were a lot of conversations about which jobs, jobs where research and data collection were really important, what kind of those jobs would disappear. And there was massive talk about the kind of productivity boosts we would get out of all this new technology. And a lot of that just failed to materialize for a lot of different reasons. And I think it's very hard to predict how this is all going to work out, really. I mean, we know it's going to be disruptive, but in what way, we don't know.
Right. It's fascinating because you guys seem to be suggesting that like we need a human check, and that's kind of the natural inclination of humans using this technology. Because I mean, arguably, we have a model of truthfulness. Like I've done so much philosophy research that you guys mentioned truthfulness, and my brain's like, oh my God, what is truth? Like what? But really, like humans just have lived experience. Like we're the ones who created the tech. We're the ones who are going to use the tech. And yeah, I hadn't even thought about how the internet was going to replace workers or industries, because I was born in 1988. So I wasn't even aware of what was happening. But I have seen in America, like librarians are now almost obsolete in libraries, which is really interesting because there's this big push against LGBTQ education in the South. And I think Tennessee just voted to completely defund libraries, which is crazy because when you take the human element out of it, I think that is an example of centralization where the government or a group of people has that power to completely eliminate contribution and participation in the conversation. And then that brings us into the DAO model of decentralized organizing and how the group really does not function without the collective, without the individual contribution. And for my background, I don't have a lot of experience with organizations that call themselves DAOs, but I do with groups that are using decentralized models of organization like sociocracy or a starfish-based organizing model that really relies on the individual to be able to coordinate within a group, which again requires a lot of psychological education and development. But Hazel, what do you think DAOs can bring as a human check for the AI conversation?
I'm not too sure what the answer to that is. I'm not sure. I think like DAO as an entity is still formulating itself. I don't think it's DAOs are really solid as like an entity that would impose a check. I think it's still on the individual, very micro level.
Yeah, I listened to one other podcast about DAOs, and it's funny. People who are into DAOs are very hesitant to define it. It seems like. Can you expand upon that? Like, why is it so difficult to describe decentralized organizing?
I mean, yeah, I mean that's a big question, right? I think like every DAO conference, even having been in the field for I think like 2 years, like every DAO research conference, even like after a while, it's like we go back to what is the DAO, and the conversation is just like it's just like philosophers asking what is truth, right? That's just the question hanging over our heads, which is funny, which is extremely funny. I guess like there are just different variety of DAOs and DAOs for different purposes. There are those like financial DAOs and DeFi DAOs, right? That's like, people put up capital and put up some sort of shared investment together. But there are also social DAOs, like where like it is essentially like a social club where people sort of hang out. It's not that different from like a golf club in the 70s. There are also like DAOs, for example, trying to do a thing, trying to build a product, trying to like organize for a political like calls, right? There, for example, like one of my favorite example DAOs is Packed Out in New York City, founded by like really good friends, some of my really good friends in Web3, which includes like Marissa, and they're doing really great work. They're really using like the decentralized model to organize and do a lot of mutual aid work, which is really impressive. I mean, yeah, I mean, like, yeah, like, there's really no agreement on what defines it now. Rather than like it has some, I think right now DAO is sort of synonymous with like decentralized group which have an affinity for blockchain and Web3 technology is the extent of it.
Right. So then why, if it's basically like a social club, like a golf club, what's the draw to organizing it and calling it a DAO?
Um, I
Like
think just
how does that operate when you're there to hang out and you're decentralized?
I mean that's an interesting question. I think there are DAOs that are, there are DAOs that are online, there are DAOs that are offline, there are some hybrid things in between. Um, yeah, I think like my experience of I mostly hang out with like political mutual aid ish DAOs, that kind of social club, not really the financial ones. And the experience there is not so different from hanging out from the mutual aid group, where there are a lot of emphasis placed on hearing each other and like some sort of decentralized representation, like some sort of like with some emphasis on mutual respect and decentralized like recognition, and making sure that power is distributed, and we constantly reflect upon how power works and how decision works and who have the power to make the decisions.
That's so important for this age. Like I'm also writing a book about this coming paradigm, this coming society. And really, the hierarchical nature of representation, I believe it's outdated. I think that we've outgrown that model. It was created when most people couldn't read, like in Greece. So it made sense that a small group of people made the decisions. But with technology, with the internet, it's the individual citizen is a fundamentally different creature. Technology gives us access to the information that we need to hold representatives accountable. We can do our own research and find whatever misinformation is being distributed. But then there's also that threat of how can you tell that information you're getting is verifiable, really? Um, and then can you explain too, Hazel, like the difference, like a financial DAO, when people enter into that and make some sort of investment, and is that coins? Like we're talking about tokens at that point?
There are everything. There are venture DAOs. There are like VCs. There are like the coin and speculation stuff. Um, yeah, like there are all sorts of things. It's a bunch of people playing with their money and inventing ways to play with their money.
Subscribe to us. We're trying to start a critical, honest discussion on an often taboo subject. If you support what we're doing and we gain your trust, help us spread the word by talking to comrades in your workplaces, activist groups, unions, bars, and cafes around the world. Share or like our content online and leave a supportive comment. Let's put working people first in this new future. Yeah, Matt, I read some of the things that you posted in our Signal chat. What's your opinion? Because I know you've done some work producing legislation. Can you expand on that?
Produce. Oh, I see. Yeah. So we've produced some, as a union, we've produced some motions that have gone through our branch and gone, through the hierarchical union structures we're talking about around the use of blockchain and tech. And, I think we're generally quite skeptical as a union of its implementation, and particularly the ways we've seen it implemented in the UK. And it's really interesting to hear this discussion here because it reminds me so much of the same discussions that were going on in, the early internet era in the early 1990s, when we were looking at, Richard Stallman and the GNU project and stuff like that around freedom of information and how technology and the new ways we have of distributing information can tackle existing issues with social hierarchies and lack of access to information and this kind of thing, and how centralization eventually really took over the internet for a whole number of reasons, but one of them was, largely, unfortunately, convenience. Many people just aren't that interested in this stuff, and to me, that's a really interesting parallel to what we have today, because I think we're sort of approaching the case with these new technologies where we're looking at, the same kind of centralization taking over from a decentralization dream, if that makes sense. And it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah. So what sort of kind of protections are you guys hoping to introduce against blockchain or cryptocurrency, and why? did you develop those? Like, what's the threat do you see?
Do you want to go first, Hazel?
No, go ahead, please.
Sure. No. So in terms of regulation, it's very difficult for me to say because I think that what a lot of people really want in these kind of technologies, and I think this is a shared goal, is decentralization. They want to know that their privacy will be preserved. They want to reduce the control that many powerful actors, whether that's state governments or large companies or whatever, have over our digital life, and that's a very noble goal. The question for me is whether in practice blockchain does that, and whether it can do that in a practical at scale deployment. And I think in some senses we've seen an answer to that. I think in sort of crypto, we've really seen an answer to that question that isn't particularly positive. But there are still open questions as to other applications of blockchain technology, and we should be open to that. But it's understandable if people are pessimistic, and it also comes down to a question of trust, as we said earlier. At the end of the day, is do people trust these technologies? So regulation is difficult to argue because I don't think the problem is so much with any inherent feature of Web3 or blockchain technology. It's just that when deployed in practice, it often tends to serve those with goals that we don't align with.
Right. I think
Yeah,
on that.
Hazel, what do you think?
Yeah, I think on that note, I think both AI and blockchain being like the hottest new technology, like quotation mark, like are in a stage where there are like people are spending a lot of time and energy and thinking into figuring out regulation, like how these technologies should be regulated. And I think there are some government efforts. There are also some like grounds up grassroots efforts in figuring out like say like blockchain ethics, right? Or like AI ethics have been like huge questions. I think on that note, I would actually love to hear a little bit more about Matt's work on AI oversight in workplaces. If you wouldn't mind
Yeah,
sharing.
sure. So yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's still very early stages for us as a union, to be honest, because one of the real difficulties that we have when it comes to AI oversight in the workplace is companies are very, very willing to tout their AI enabled technologies when they're deploying them as products, but they're very reticent to do so when it comes to how they're surveilling their own employees. And so it can actually be really difficult to tell, if your company is tracking, the amount of time that you spend with your laptop open or is occasionally peering through your webcam. Well, that's not AI, but that's clearly using technology in a very invasive manner to control their workforce. I think the most prominent example of the use of AI in the workplace has been Amazon, and the very well documented examples of how Amazon uses tracking devices on workers, as well as advanced robotic facilities to control and dehumanize workers in ways that hasn't really been seen before. And that is really the one example that's dominated all the media up to this point. I think a lot of the other examples that we have and that we've seen in terms of employee surveillance are still really skirting that line of normal, familiar technology we're used to being deployed in a surveillance manner and AI. And I think the next few years is really we're going to start to see that transition because I think people are rightfully very skeptical of the deployment of AI in this way. And so I think there will be some resistance to it. But because of that, I think companies are going to be very reticent to admit that it's going on.
Right. So I guess the regulation would really be focused on surveillance as an individual right to privacy. Is that correct?
I think so. And I think what we really need is some sort of body. We've seen it with the deployment of GDPR and data protection regulations in Europe that is really flexible to the new avenues and ways in which AI will continue to be deployed and can adapt enforcement powers along the controlled lines of a basic legislation that can adapt to that. I don't really see, given how open-ended things are at the moment, I don't see how any lawmaker really can write a piece of legislation that covers everything. I mean, the EU are attempting to do it right now, but we'll see how that works out.
Yeah, and something that I've mentioned a few times in other episodes is like technology is amoral. It's just a tool. It's the human and why they use it, how they use it, that introduces any sort of good or bad, beneficial, detrimental element of it. And especially with AI being essentially reflective and generative to what it has access to, I think it's really up to us to figure ourselves out and undo the trauma of capitalism. Like Web3 workers and the labor movement really only finds its context in a capitalist society. I was working on an application last year. We were calling it Union Seed, and it was application, organizational networking application, and that was encrypted. That would allow labor to organize itself in a safe way. And during research for that project, I found this fascinating graph that just compares the rate of unionization and income inequality. And in the 80s, you could see this massive change where unionization plummets and income inequality goes off the charts. So from that chart and from my research, I kind of deduced that the union is the check to capitalism, right? And the acknowledgement of organizing together with shared goals and emphasizing the value of human life and human experience is the only thing that will keep capitalism from monetizing every second of our lives. And it's interesting because, the blue collar worker industry historically unionizes against automation, which is then creates difficulty when I talk to my local and other union members about technology, because they pretty much shut me down. Like, we're anti-automation, we're anti-technology, we're fucking longshoremen, But in this day and age, technology really can introduce a truly democratic society. And when now the white collar industries are facing threat of automation with AI, it kind of begs the question of how are we going to work to live if there are no jobs left? So in my mind, it kind of represents a fork in the road where we can continue on with this capitalist mindset where profit matters most. And that's what's motivating organizations and businesses to surveil their workers, to make sure that, they could cut corners, cut costs. But I don't know, it feels like it's also a great opportunity, because is it such a bad thing if AI can do a lot of the work that maybe you were forced to do just to pay your bills, when at the end of the day, you just want to bake bread and paint, right? So what do you guys think what AI can do for kind of a utopian future and a dystopian future? Matt, you go first with your AI knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely a positive future to be had with the deployment of technology, but I think we need to be very cautious about what we think of, because, as you said, whilst technology has the potential to produce a more fair society, it does that through the establishment of fair human structures and systems. And as long as those aren't present, technology is not going to be deployed in an amicable or equal way. And I think that as we look into the research and development of these technologies, if we're not challenging the systems that exist at least in parallel, if not at a much more rapid pace, what we're going to see is the development of these technologies outpacing any organizational effort to resist their negative effects. And what we're going to end up with is unequal systems that are suddenly far more efficient and far more capable of repressing workers and the working class. And we are, it may not be too far away that there is a point in human history where technology advances so far that it makes organizing against further technological development or against for further progressive changes in society a hell of a lot harder.
Oh, interesting. Hazel, what do you think?
Yeah, I think Matt said this really well. I think also I would just add perspective as someone who use AI like on my day-to-day heavily. Like, I use Midjourney to generate photos, like generate artwork. Like, I use ChatGPT basically as like a search engine. I use it to, like, when I help me comprehend things, help me come up with syllabus, help me learn stuff. I think there is a way in which that using AI, like AI can be a really powerful tool. And it can be sort of liberating and changing the way that, for example, changing the way how we learn and changing the way that how we like communicate. I think in particular, I'm also really excited about, like, there's a bunch of development in AI personal assistant in like where I think some companies are trying to build like a personalized AI personal assistant that help you go through your day to day and go about your day to day. And it can take various different form. It can take like the form of an agent, a character. It can also like just help you complete daily tasks, like ordering groceries or things like that. I think that's like a sort of nice utopia or like hopeful view of AI. Yeah, I think I think like the worry I have is I don't want AI technology to and access to it to entrench existing systematic barriers, right? Like right now, some people still can't access internet, or some people who are not as tech savvy. Like, are they really like? Do they really have fair access to these tools? And will like just like the huge efficiency and huge power of AI like entrench like even more insecurity is something I have at the back of my mind.
Yeah. Oh God, that's so cool. You use AI every day. I'm such a fucking noob. I've never even touched it, but it's starting to bleed into, my grandma use of Facebook because I'm in a lot of like neurodivergent groups. One of them is neurodivergent cleaning, which is basically people who are so overwhelmed by simple tasks. And there have been a couple posts like, oh, I use AI to make a structure of cleaning my house. And what should I do first? How do I break down a task? So in that way, it's fantastic for the person who maybe their brain structure makes it difficult to do the things that they need to get done. But it reminds me so much of the dystopian kind of like Terminator, and there's this animated movie that I watch with my kids, Gen X, where you're basically in a world where everybody has a personal robot and it's AI. And then inevitably, AI develops a consciousness and it tries to destroy humanity, right? Because we are the parasite, we are the virus. And that's also in Tron as well. Have you guys seen that, Tron?
I haven't.
Only the
It's
newer
interesting.
one. I'm that young.
Yeah, I know. I haven't seen the older one either, but just, the whole idea is that a developer creates a virtual world and asks Tron, his like personal assistant, to make it perfect. And of course, that assistant is using a framework, a perspective of all good or all bad. We need order. If you disrupt the process, then you should be eliminated. And that's something that I touch on in my book, is just this perspective that we have of duality and believing that the world itself and our experience is fundamentally separated. Like each person is separate from one another. Each object is separate from the other object, and using duality of A and not A, that somehow if I think something is good because of my personal experience and someone disagrees with me, I am right and they are wrong. And because we have no decentralized kind of connected perspective, a holistic perspective, then it leads us into dominance, oppression, and kind of trying to eradicate deviance and eradicate questioning and critique. So do you think AI, that's kind of where it's going right now if we don't step into the field?
Yeah, I think it's really hard. I mean, it's hard to say whether we intentionally developed in that direction, but I do think it is one of the things we can be most confident about that it will be. I mean, we only have to look at social media as the perfect example and analog for this, I think, where we have this amazing technology that for an individual is incredibly useful. You can reconnect with old friends, you can see news and consume content in ways you couldn't before. But then eventually what we saw is the morphing of this system into one that, rather than serving the individual, continues to do so, but in a much more insidious way by taking advantage of human psychology. And it eventually, resulted in this social media landscape that is really poisonous to society as a whole, yet still is highly entertaining to any one individual. And I say that as an avid user of social media. And I think with AI, we could end up with a very similar situation where what you have is systems that are personalized and designed to cater to individuals in a way that is really, really helpful. But at the same time, you end up with this disconnect between people where people are exposed to different types of information in different ways. And you have a breakdown in the common consensus of what there is. And I think we're already seeing this in the States and the UK in a political sense, where social media has created this world where vast segments of the population can't even agree on, who the president is. Like
Yeah.
that's huge. That's unimaginable in almost any other era in human history, and that's a process which I can only see AI really taking advantage of and escalating.
Yeah, interesting. Hazel, what do you think?
I think Matt basically said most of what I wanted.
Oh, well done, Matt. But Hazel, do you think that DAOs and decentralization will, and then using Web3 as well as part of that model, do you think that that is the way forward to kind of protect against this dystopian use of AI and technology?
Um, I guess I feel like just Web3 technology right now is a lot more inaccessible than AI. I think anybody can just pull up ChatGPT or like Perplexity AI or something, and it doesn't work so different from Google. And that's I feel like that access barrier isn't that high. But in order to like use proper like DAO management tools, like you gotta have a wallet, you gotta have like there's just a bunch of things to go through. It's something like as of right now, Web3 technology that aims to do the decentralization are pretty difficult to use and is going to be like a barrier to everyday person. Um, so there is that. But I think also like we can all benefit from thinking about and considering the ways of decentralization that's not necessarily entirely reliant on these technological tools. I think thinking about the principle of like empowering, thinking about representation, even in like the data sets like AI is trained on, and thinking about decentralization in these ways are helpful.
So how does Labor DAO use blockchain?
We have pretty
Or
standard,
how,
like we have like for example like a juice box thing for people to give donation anonymously. I think right now we don't have our own tokens. Yeah, but I think right now we are not fully operating as a DAO, but I think we want to help other union become DAOs. But I think how to make the technology accessible is something that's very much in discussion. Is not mature yet because technology isn't like and the tooling isn't mature yet.
do you think that it's at the rate that it needs to be in order to figure it out in time before robots take over the world?
I mean, that feels like a long.
Like,
I mean, hopefully,
I hope so.
I hope so too.
Yeah, what about your experience in a tech union, Matt? Do you think that the development of a union, kind of in response or in the context of AI, do you think that we're going to figure it out in time? Like, are we on pace?
It all depends on what that pace is, which is so hard to predict. I mean, it's we should always be organizing right now, right? And the answer is I don't know, because I think that tech as an industry is going to be really transformed by these new technologies, but in what way, we just don't know. Will new jobs be created, as has historically been the case in different areas? Will um, engineers designed to find the optimal prompt replace software engineers at the same level? So in terms of the tech industry, it's really hard to say, but I think in many other sectors of the economy, yeah, that's definitely, now is the time to be organizing. I think Luddite is a term that is used negatively far too often, and there's been some really interesting analysis on the history of the and legacy of the Luddite movement, and I think that's something we need to look towards again.
Can you define Luddite? Even I don't know what that means, and I was an English major.
Sure. So
What the fuck?
it's a term which I believe at the start of the Industrial Revolution was used to refer to workers who resisted um, the implementation of new technologies in cotton mills that threatened to, replace workers, make the workplaces much more dangerous, and also reduce and depress wages in huge ways. And the way that these workers resisted it, amongst many other techniques, was through the sabotage of machines and technologies that threatened to replace them or to reduce their rights in a very physical way. I mean, the term Luddite refers to throwing wooden shoes in cotton mills to stop them working. So that kind of organized resistance against AI may not materialize, but it's also something that we should be prepared for, whether we wish it or not.
Oh, interesting. Do you think, I mean, it seems to me that unionization would be, because unionization is really, it's such a human thing. Like I try to remind my local, we have a fantastic job as a longshoreman. We get really high wages, 100% medical. We work at will, but because it's so hierarchical and kind of it's patriarchal. I mean, there's probably like a 7 to 10% women working down there. Oh God, I lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, so I have to remind them that like a union is a fucking human-based society. It's not just the job that gives us the protections, and we forget that it's a way for us to connect together within a group and empower ourselves as a collective. So it seems to me that unionization would be the Luddite disruption of AI. Do you guys agree?
I think it can definitely form part of it. I mean, I think definitely in the tech industry, we get this a lot where, we organize as a union remotely, across the country. And that's how a lot of tech workers like it. But at the end of the day, the hard work is still very, very human. We all love a tech utopia, but at the end of the day, you want to be out organizing workers. You've got to have face-to-face meetings. You've got to be calling people and that kind of stuff. And I think it's a little bit poetic almost that the resistance to kind of the unfair implementation of AI tech might rely in that most human side of organizing, again, as it did, as you said, back in the 80s.
Nice. Hazel, what do you think? Are unions the answer?
I think like there are still a lot of barriers to forming unions, in particular type of like the sort of like manual labor unions in the U.S. I think there are just a lot of practical difficulties for unions in America to be thriving. Yeah, I think like that's some barrier we need to overcome first in order for that to happen. But I think like that's a lovely mental image. But I think like policy and like unions in America just these years are, especially the past I think 1-2 years, are kind of hard.
Yeah, and
but then
just to add, oh, so I was just going to add very quickly. I think you're absolutely right, and it's very easy to use unionism as like a synonym for organized labor, but really what we need is organized labor, and unionism is one expression of it that we see a lot.
Yeah, I mentioned this in the first episode. There's this really incredible book called Strike by Jeremy Brecker, and it discusses how the formulation of a union can actually prevent worker empowerment because it's based in a hierarchical model of representation. And so the representatives, your union rep, is tasked with keeping the peace between the employer and the employees. And as a human, like you have psychology that you're dealing with. When you have a position of power, you experience aspects of privilege, and you will act to protect that privilege and position, even if it disempowers the workers. So I think that's an excellent point, Matt, that it's not really unions, it's organized labor and a decentralized organization of labor. So we've got all the pieces, I think, within us three to really figure this shit out. I mean, I was telling Hazel, like, I'm fiercely optimistic about the future, not just because it makes sense to me, like I truly believe that's where we're going, but also because understanding psychology, it makes a huge difference in your behavior, how you expect things to go. And if you're expecting it not to work out, you're just not going to take any risks. You're not going to try as hard. But if you intentionally focus on the future, that it is going to work out, we are improving, we're evolving around this shared dream. That's like pretty biological. Like human happiness is not that complex. We need a house, we need food, we need community, we need support, and we share that regardless of our class, creed, or culture. So we're fighting against like the historical, colonial, oppressive, patriarchal kind of Western mind. But I think in this day and age, like we are on the verge of a huge social transformation. And, I have three kids. There's 6, 9, and 10. And it's just so fascinating to see how technology works in the way that they're growing up. Like, I'm 35, I had a pager in 6th grade, I got my first smartphone in my early 20s. My 9-year-old has a smartphone. And as a child, like from 7 to 14, you're really building your brain out and how you think the world works, how access works. And my kids are growing up in a dramatically different world of access. And I think that as they grow up, and even older than 10, as the younger generation grows up and enters into society, their expectations of access is going to reverberate into the structure of society as well. Because they're just not going to be down for the bullshit of like oppression and patriarchy, because we know that there's a better way. We know now we have access to the information and research, and the demand is there. Like, however dystopian things get and how terrible they are, I was telling Hazel earlier, it's actually beneficial because particularly America is so backwards and so fucked up that it's obvious what we have to do. And it's the exact opposite of what we're doing. So as long as we can like get ourselves up and stand, get off our knees and stand and enter into this field of AI and field of organizing and bring that collective spirit into it. I mean, shit, we should ask AI how to save the planet, right? Like, how do we convert trash into energy? I think it's really exciting. Are you guys excited?
I mean, totally. We can totally ask AI that. Like, we can ask AI to develop like environmental friendly solutions for us. I'm excited to like research with it. And there are, I think like AI could be used for a lot of these good things, even if like it also right now it can still be the way that you use energy can still be optimized. Obviously, I think before it gets too long, I think it might be a good point for us to wrap up and say our final conclusion thoughts from either.
Right. Totally. I'm sorry. I just love this conversation. I think I said my conclusive piece. Matt, what's yours?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think it's really interesting. I think we need to be very aware of, the systems we live under, and how, when we look at the history of technological development and the access to information that the internet envisaged, how that was gradually morphed from freedom of information for everyone to having so much information that we needed more technology to control it, and that then could be harnessed in ways that worked against collective organizing. So I think there's a lot of hope in terms of how technology and new ways of and how it can enable new methods of organizing, but we need to be aware that access isn't everything, and that the systems we have will seek to subvert these technologies for their own goals, and we should always be aware of that as we're developing them.
Perfect. Okay, well, I'm going to wrap this up because it's almost been an hour. But thank you guys so much for joining us, Matt. It's been wonderful hearing about AI with my noob self, and Hazel. I'm so glad you're here because you access it every day. So everyone, listeners, thank you again for sitting with us at Web3 Workers, where we discuss how technology can empower the labor movement to create a better world. And we will see you next time. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. If you like us, please give us a follow. Thank you, Matt. Thanks, everyone.